Now, on a bit more of a serious note, we were trying to determine how you'd describe your brand of humor. How would you describe it?
Funny.
We know Cheech and Chong as the kings of stoner comedy, with the hazy punchlines and the perfect comic chemistry. But behind the Bond jokes and cult classic films, there's a world of unexpected twists and awkward beginnings. But we aren't just scratching the surface here, because there's so much more that most people have no idea about. This is the real story that proves that even when two people don't click at first, they can still create something magical together. Stick around till the end, because we're saving the most surprising facts for last. Let's get into it. How the duo met. The story of how Cheech and Chong came together is one of those real-life moments that feels almost too perfectly strange to be true, but it is. And the fact that their epic, decades-spanning comedy journey started in a topless bar in Vancouver, well, that just adds to the bizarre brilliance of it all. Most comedy duos you hear about either grew up on the same block or bonded over schoolyard jokes, right? But not these two. Richard Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong's lives couldn't have been more different before fate decided to throw them into the same smoky room and eventually onto the same stage. Now, Cheech wasn't exactly gearing up for a life full of punchlines and pot jokes. In fact, comedy wasn't even on his radar. Born in South Los Angeles to a father who worked as a police officer, Cheech had taken a completely different route in life. He was studying pottery. He had enrolled at California State University Northridge, dreaming of clay wheels and kills, not standing ovations. But the late 1960s were a chaotic time, especially for young American men. The Vietnam War draft loomed over every decision. So, when faced with the possibility of being sent overseas to fight a war he didn't believe in, Cheech made a bold decision. He fled to Canada. "I didn't want to get killed in Vietnam," he would later say, plain and simple. His choice to dodge the draft wasn't easy, but it planted him in Vancouver at just the right moment, though he didn't know it yet. Think Cheech and Chong were just two silly stoners who got lucky? Think again. Their real story is one twist after another. Hang tight till the very end, because fact number one, it's the kind of thing nobody ever talks about. Living in a new country without a clear plan wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Cheech took whatever jobs he could to get by. He drove trucks, he unloaded carpets, and all the while he kept working on his pottery. His life was messy and uncertain, but somehow he kept going. Then one night, looking for any kind of work that could keep him afloat, he walked into a local club. And that's where destiny was waiting for him, though it probably didn't look that glamorous at first glance. On the other end of this comedy origin story, there was Tommy Chong. Tommy's life had already taken some interesting twists of its own. He was born in Edmonton, Alberta, to a Chinese father and a Scottish-Irish mother, and he'd already tasted a bit of fame, not as a comedian, but as a musician. He played guitar in a band called Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, which actually got signed by Motown. That alone could have been its own story, right? But by the 1970s, Tommy had moved on from the music scene and started a different kind of business. He was running a topless bar in Vancouver's Chinatown called the Shanghai Junk. But Tommy being Tommy, he didn't want to run just any topless bar. No, he wanted something different. So he blended burlesque with performance art, transforming the Shanghai Junk into part strip club, part improv theater. He called his sketch group City Works, and they do little comedy skits between the dancers' routines. Kind of a weird combo, right? But somehow it worked. Tommy liked experimenting with ideas and pushing boundaries, and this setup let him do both. So one night in 1970, Cheech walked into the Shanghai Junk just looking for a job, any job. He wasn't trying to be funny. He just needed to pay rent. Tommy took one look at him and thought, why not? There was something about Cheech that clicked. Maybe it was his energy, or his timing, or just his vibe. Either way, Tommy invited him to join the improv group. And that's when the magic started. Their chemistry was undeniable, though at first, neither of them realized what they had stumbled upon. One night during a show, they started riffing off each other, and somehow fell into a bit about a guy looking for his friend Dave. The punchline? The other guy was so stoned he kept saying, "Dave's not here." It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It just happened. But the audience went wild. Tommy would later say it was all an accident. But sometimes, the best things in life are, aren't they? That one routine, born out of a completely unscripted moment, became their first hit. And it gave them a taste of what they could do together. They realized they weren't just funny, they were funny together. That's a rare thing. So they kept performing together night after night, and slowly their act evolved. Tommy played the mellow hippie, the guy who looked like he lived in a cloud of smoke. Cheech was the fast-talking smart aleck, sharp and full of energy. Their personas bounced off each other perfectly. It was like watching two sides of the same stoner coin. As their reputation in Vancouver grew, it became clear they had something special. Within just a few months, they decided to leave the club behind and hit the road as a comedy duo. They called themselves Cheech and Chong, and from that point on, they became synonymous with counterculture comedy. Their material was bold, irreverent, and completely different from what anyone else was doing at the time. They weren't just making jokes, they were tapping into a whole generation's way of thinking. And it all.
They had a love-hate relationship off stage. Behind the iconic stoner jokes, the unforgettable movie scenes, and the thunderous laughter echoing through sold-out theaters, the relationship between Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong was far from the carefree bromance fans assumed it to be. Sure, they looked inseparable on screen, two hilarious halves of the same offbeat coin, but beneath the surface, their partnership was laced with friction, creative differences, and moments of real tension that stretched across nearly 2 decades. It was one of those classic cases where the public only saw the polished product, not the mess behind the curtain. If they were such a dream team, then why did things fall apart so bitterly? That's the question Cheech and Tommy's story slowly begins to answer, if you're willing to look past the weed smoke and laughter. According to Cheech Marin's memoir, the truth was that he and Chong were never really best friends in the traditional sense. Cheech described their connection more like that of brothers, not necessarily bonded by affection, but by experience, longevity, and a strange kind of loyalty. "We're brothers. We're not best friends," he wrote, offering a glimpse into the duality of their dynamic. They could fight with alarming intensity one moment and then, as if flipping a switch, pull off a flawless comedy routine in the next. Doesn't that sound emotionally exhausting? But for them, that was just the nature of their partnership. Cheech compared their working relationship to the way pearls are formed, an irritation inside the shell that, under pressure, turns into something beautiful. Could it be that the very spark that made them comedy legends was also the same thing tearing them apart? As Cheech saw it, their chemistry on stage and in films didn't always come from deep camaraderie or mutual admiration. It sometimes came in spite of it. He recalled that even when backstage arguments got heated and egos flared, they would still manage to perform as if nothing had happened. That ability to separate their personal riffs from their professional delivery might seem like an impressive skill, but it also hinted at the underlying issues simmering just beneath the surface. Cheech would later say that their back and forth felt like a push-pull dynamic. Sometimes you wanted your brother to just be quiet. Other times, you needed him to have your back. That constant emotional roller coaster made for great comedy, sure, but also for a pretty volatile relationship. Now, what role did ego play in this unraveling? Quite a large one if you ask both men. One major point of contention revolved around creative control. While both were officially credited as writers on all 6 of their major films from 1978 to 1984, it was Tommy Chong who took the director's chair for 4 of those. For Cheech, this imbalance wasn't just a minor detail, it became a very touchy thing, as he later put it. He felt that his own creative contributions were being downplayed or outright dismissed. And while Chong might have claimed that the setup was a strategic trade-off, Cheech couldn't ignore how that translated into a lopsided power dynamic on set. At one point, the tension even spilled onto the screen. In a documentary, Chong bluntly told Cheech that he never really earned the title of director. That's a pretty loaded accusation, right? Cheech didn't take it lying down. He shot back, "That's a lie. I directed just as much as you did." For longtime fans, hearing them argue over credit may have been surprising, maybe even disappointing, but it painted a far more realistic portrait of their working relationship. After all, when two creative minds collide and both think they know best, isn't some form of conflict almost inevitable? As their fame grew, so did their problems. The turning point seemed to be around the early 1980s, particularly during the making of Nice Dreams in 1981. That's when Cheech felt things started to shift more aggressively. Chong, as he tells it, became increasingly controlling. He wanted to write everything, direct everything, and make all the big calls. And for Cheech, that made him feel pushed out of a creative process he'd helped build from the beginning. It was no longer a partnership. It felt more like a one-man show with Cheech playing the sidekick. How long could a team survive when one person feels invisible? The final straw came in 1985. They had just released their album Get Out of My Room, and Cheech wanted Chong to help record his song, Born in East LA, a project Cheech was genuinely excited about. But Chong refused. He didn't want to be part of it, and that decision ultimately marked the end of their 17-year run as a comedy duo. Cheech went ahead and made the song and its accompanying film on his own, a solo venture that turned out to be both critically and commercially successful. But underneath that success was a deep rift that had finally split wide open. Years later, looking back with some clarity and perhaps a little humility, Chong admitted that the collapse of their partnership was probably his fault. He said he'd become something of a megalomaniac. Once he got a taste of directing and the authority that came with it, it was hard to let go. Your word's God, he explained, describing the trap many directors fall into when they start to believe their own hype. It's almost tragic, isn't it? The very role that gave him creative freedom also became the wedge that drove them apart. That doesn't mean they never crossed paths again. Over the years, they reunited occasionally, sometimes for tours, sometimes for interviews or documentaries, but their dynamic never fully returned to what it had been in their prime. In fact, Cheech openly admitted that even when they reconnected, there was still plenty of animosity between them. It wasn't like flipping a switch and suddenly becoming buddies again. Healing takes time, especially when the wounds go back decades. Now, while most people still associate Cheech and Chong with their laid-back, stoner personas, there's so much more to their story than just clouds of smoke and punchlines. These two actually carved out impressive careers far beyond the realm of comedy, and what they've accomplished individually might just surprise you. Stick around, because you won't want to miss the unexpected turns their journeys took, especially the part that comes later.
They've done way more than just stoner comedy. Over the years, many people have come to know Cheech and Chong as the kings of stoner comedy. The laid-back duo whose pot-fueled antics filled theaters with laughter and brought cannabis culture into the mainstream long before it was trendy. But if you think that's all there is to them, you're missing out on a much bigger, richer story. Because beyond the haze of smoke and punchlines, Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong have quietly built entertainment careers that stretch far beyond the bong. In fact, their talents have taken them into places you probably wouldn't expect. Animation, professional wrestling, political activism, and even serious documentary filmmaking. So, who are Cheech and Chong when they're not cracking weed jokes? The answer might just surprise you. Let's start with something that's easy to overlook: voice acting. Now, most fans may not immediately associate Cheech and Chong with animated films, but both men have actually made impressive names for themselves in that space. Cheech Marin, for instance, has a voice that's instantly recognizable, smooth, a little raspy, and full of charisma. Disney certainly noticed. Cheech voiced the lively hyena Banzai in The Lion King, one of the most iconic animated movies of all time. And if you've watched the Cars franchise, then you've heard him as Ramon, the lowrider with flair and attitude. But that's not all. Cheech also lent his vocal talents to Ferngully, the last rainforest, playing the character Stump, a wise, cracking beetle who shares the screen with Robin Williams' back character. Who would have guessed that one of the biggest names in cannabis comedy would end up working alongside the genie himself? Tommy Chong, of course, didn't sit on the sidelines either. His voice work may be less mainstream, but it's every bit as bold. He carved out a quirky little niche for himself on South Park, the long-running and famously irreverent animated series. And he didn't just play any character. He played himself. In the episode titled Cherokee Hair Tampons, Chong portrayed a fictional version of himself in a storyline that poked fun at alternative medicine and New Age wellness fads. It was cheeky, weird, and classic South Park, and it showed that Chong could laugh at himself while still delivering a solid performance. Between the two of them, Cheech and Chong have voiced everything from family-friendly characters to raunchy caricatures, proving their flexibility and range in ways that many of their fans might never have imagined. But animation wasn't the only unexpected path they wandered down. In one of the more surprising turns of their careers, Cheech and Chong actually stepped into the world of professional wrestling. In March 2010, the legendary duo guest hosted WWE Raw, the flagship show of World Wrestling Entertainment. Now, what were two pot comedy veterans doing on a wrestling show, you might ask? Promoting their Get It Legal tour, of course. But more than that, they brought their signature energy and irreverent humor to the ring. They even got involved in a segment with wrestler Santino Marella, an encounter that quickly turned ridiculous when they detected marijuana in his herbal tea. The whole bit was as silly as you'd expect, but it also showed just how adaptable they really were. Whether it was comedy clubs, cartoon studios, or sports arenas, Cheech and Chong had a way of making themselves at home. And then there's the more serious side of their story, the one that doesn't often get enough attention. Over time, both Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong have become more than just entertainers. They've stepped into the world of activism, lending their voices to political and health-focused documentaries that go far beyond laughs and punchlines. A standout example is the film aka Tommy Chong, a deeply personal documentary that follows Tommy's arrest and prosecution by the U.S. government for selling glass pipes and bongs online. While some may have shrugged it off as a celebrity scandal, the film shed light on the broader implications of the harmful substance war and how selectively it was enforced. Many viewed the case as politically charged and unnecessary, a clear example of the system making an example out of someone because of who they were, not what they did. In sharing his experience, Chong revealed a thoughtful, reflective side that fans didn't often get to see on stage. So what does all this mean when we talk about Cheech and Chong? It means that labeling them as just stoner comedians misses the point entirely. These are performers who have reinvented themselves again and again, moving from slapstick sketches about smoking joints to heartfelt commentary about justice, public health, and personal growth. Behind the laughs is a legacy built on reinvention, resilience, and raw honesty. And trust us, there's still so much more to uncover. Stick around, because we're about to dive into 5 things you didn't know about Cheech and Chong that will blow your mind. And you'll definitely want to watch till the end for the most surprising revelation of all. For things you didn't know about Cheech and Chong that will blow your mind. Firstly, they were almost in a Friday the 13th movie. When people talk about legendary comedy duos, most names come and go with a nod and a smile. But when Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong enter the conversation, you can almost hear the distant echo of laughter through a thick haze of nostalgia and smoke. Cheech and Chong weren't just comedians. They were a cultural movement. A stoner revolution in bell-bottoms and bandanas. Sure, their movies were zany, hilarious, and absurd in the best way possible. But what most people don't know is just how many strange, downright unbelievable stories went on behind the scenes during their time in the spotlight. And once you start hearing these tales, you can't help but wonder, how much weirder could things have gotten? Well, let's start with something truly interesting. Cheech and Chong were nearly in a